Gotta stay hydrated. Woo! Hey there, welcome back to my channel. This is episode 3 of Meghan Monday. I am so glad you're here. If you have already watched episode 1 and episode 2, then you know that these are coming out every Monday, and they are going to start with just kind of a little bit of an update on how my body is adapting to the reverse diet that I'm going through right now, which if you haven't seen videos 1 and 2, is basically just a way of me saying I am slowly, incrementally, over time, adding calories to my life in a really methodical way so as to avoid gaining body fat, but build up the amount of food that I'm eating each day as much as possible until the point where I am gaining body fat. So I want to be eating as much as I possibly can when it comes time to do a cut later on in the year leading up to my 40th birthday. So I'm reverse dieting to re-nourish myself, refeed my metabolism, and get to a place to where my thyroid, my brain, my hormonal systems, my body feels safe to burn fat when I do the cut, and I will be able to cut and lose fat on a way higher number of calories than if I were to try to attempt that now. So the week 3 update is that my measurements are exactly the same. My waist has not increased, my thighs have not increased, bust, everything is the exact same. My weight is still continuing to fluctuate, all in the neighborhood of 155. So I've been 155.4, 155.8. Today I was 155.0. It's all, I talked last week in episode number 2 that those fluctuations do not indicate loss of actual body fat. The scale would have to show an incremental decrease multiple times over time for that to be the case. So these are just your standard fluctuations. I am in the neighborhood of 155 pounds body weight, holding steady and still increasing food, which is exactly the point. So we are on plan, my friends. Also, the other point of reverse dieting is to feed your training, to be able to train at a higher capacity. So when I get to the place to where I'm doing my cut later in the year, I will be hopefully lifting heavier weights, running faster 400-meter splits, being able to do more pull-ups, more push-ups. I'll be able to train at a higher intensity, so my workouts will be even more effective because I'm getting stronger and faster by fueling myself more properly now. So all this extra calories that my body is finally getting to experience are feeding my training. So I'm getting stronger, better, faster. And that actually was exemplified this week because we did what's called a benchmark workout in CrossFit. A benchmark workout in CrossFit is something that we would repeat usually once or twice a year, depending on the gym. And it's something that it's kind of a test. So this particular one that we did the other day is called Helen. It was 3 rounds of a 400-meter run, 21 kettlebell swings with a 35-pound kettlebell for RX women, and then 12 pull-ups. And in CrossFit, we can kip, which just means you use a little bit of a swing on the bar. The best I've ever done on that workout was 12 minutes and 26 seconds. That was before I did the bodybuilding show a few years ago. And then when I came back to CrossFit just most recently, within the last year and a half or so, my first Helen time after coming back was 14 minutes and 16 seconds. So I had gone down quite a bit in aerobic capacity. And then yesterday, I was hoping to beat that 14-16 time, knowing I wouldn't be all the way back to my 12-26 capacity. So I shaved roughly I did the math, I want to say it's 24 seconds. So roughly 30 seconds I shaved off the 14-16. So yesterday I did Helen in 13:52. And I was happy with that. So that goes to show that I'm eating more food, I'm training more consistently, and my aerobic and muscular endurance capacity are reflecting that. So those test workouts are a good way to see if your body is responding in the right direction. And mine is. I feel great in the gym. So there you have it. That was the update. But today I want to talk about intermittent fasting because this is a question that I get asked a lot by my CrossFit clients in person, by my private nutrition clients, and also on social media quite a bit. And in fact, it just came up last week on one of my posts. So I just wanted to give you my 2 cents, 12 cents, however much this is worth. First, let me say, I'm obviously not a doctor. I'm not licensed in any capacity. So whether or not you fast, how often you eat, how much you eat, all of those things are decisions that you're probably gonna wanna run by a licensed practitioner, especially if you have some sort of diagnosis or on any medications. Like, take care of yourself, go to your doctor. That's the first thing. if you are just kind of curious and experimenting with this, and you've heard that some of your friends have said they've lost weight doing it, or you like what you're reading online, you hear a lot of people talking about it, and you're just curious what my personal thoughts are, that is what I'm here to do, is to give you my opinion. Okay? Okay. So first, what is intermittent fasting? It basically is where you are taking your normal amount of calories and consuming it in a shorter period of time. So whether that's a shorter window of one 24-hour period, so you have like a restricted feeding window, that's the most common type of fasting, or you're taking the amount of calories you would normally eat across the span of a week, 7 days, and you're squishing it into 5 days. So maybe some people will do like a 5-day normal eating pattern and a 2-day full fast. Or a 1-day full fast, or they'll do a couple days a month or whatever. So you're basically taking your normal amount of calories for whatever time period we're talking about, a day, a week, a month, etc., and you're compressing those calories into a shorter window than what you otherwise would. I mentioned some of the popular varieties. There's the 5-2, which is eat normal 5 days, fast for 2. There's the 16-8, which I think is probably the most ubiquitous, the most common, the most talked about. And that's where you are fasting for 16 hours and eating in a feeding window of 8 hours. Now, that sounds maybe more overwhelming or intimidating than it actually is, because hopefully for 8 to 9 of those 16 hours, you're asleep. So it's essentially an overnight fast. So you're basically skipping breakfast and not snacking after dinner. So it would look like your first meal is at noon and your dinner is at 8, and then that's it. So you eat from 12 to 8 or 11 to 7 or whatever it is. Next question. Why would you? One of the arguments is that humans evolved before there was this just constant, steady stream of available food all of the time. So our internal biological mechanisms are really adapted to do well, and maybe even to necessitate periods of not feeding. And I actually think there's a good bit of truth to that. I'm going to get to that in a second when I talk about giving digestion a break. But one of the primary arguments for intermittent fasting is that humans were just built to eat more cyclically than we do in modern times now, because food is abundant and available all the time. And there are quite a bit of studies, both human and rat studies, that show a variety of benefits in groups that were intermittent fasting versus a controlled group. Things like improved insulin sensitivity, better blood sugar handling, things like weight loss, mental clarity, lowered blood pressure, better cholesterol profiles, reduced risk for cancer, Alzheimer's, just a variety of good things have popped up in the literature and anecdotally from people that have experimented with IF, intermittent fasting. Okay, so that sounds good, right? Here are my 2 beefs with the whole intermittent fasting thing and the available science on it. Number 1, there is so much more science on all the positive benefits that come from any caloric restriction. There are reams of studies that point to longer lifespan, reduced risk for disease, all the things I mentioned, when the control human, which is eating a constant stream of calories, the standard American diet, when that control human is put up against somebody that reduces calories in any way, shape, or form, the reduced calorie person performs better on all the health things. So there's tons of literature that shows studies like that. In my opinion, there is nothing that shows that intermittent fasting is better than any other type of caloric restriction. I believe that it is just another way of reducing calories. So you may intend, let's say you're eating 2,000 calories a day now, you may intend to take those same 2,000 calories and just stick them in a shorter window, in an 8-hour feeding window versus a 12 or 14-hour feeding window. And my personal opinion is that the literature does not support that you are any better off taking that same 2,000 calories and eating it in a shorter window than in a longer window. I think what the literature shows to me, when I consider all of the studies that I've read across PubMed, is that any form of caloric restriction, and intermittent fasting is a way that people will typically eat less over the course of a day, a week, a month, is going to be beneficial in the long run. So I think it's just a way of not eating as much. And that can be enough. That can be a good thing. There are some people that have schedules that just do not allow for regular regimented eating times. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking like an ER doc or a kindergarten teacher. Like there are plenty of situations where you are not able over the course of a day to predict your meals or to stop what you're doing in order to make sure that you get one in. And so for those people, intermittent fasting can be really useful because it just works for your lifestyle, because you have to be adapted to go hours without a meal and that be okay with you physiologically. So for some situations, I think just the fact that it works for your life is perhaps reason enough. However, I do think it works better for men than women, and I am getting to that. So I told you I had two beefs. Number one, I do not think that there is good science that shows that intermittent fasting is valuable as a dietary approach over and above its ability to reduce calories. I think that's why the benefits are happening, is because people have accidentally or on purpose reduced their caloric intake by virtue of closing their feeding window. You're de facto eating less, you're skipping a meal. My second beef is that the literature that we do have, both rats and humans, is majorly skewed towards males. If you do a search for intermittent fasting men and then do a search for intermittent fasting women, the search for men will yield tons of results, and the search for any mention of women in context of an intermittent fasting study will yield far, far, far fewer results. And none of those, not one single study, is on only females, and not one of them is a randomized control study, which is the gold standard in science, and not one of them focuses on hormonal or reproductive health as a byproduct of intermittent fasting. So all of the benefits that we talk about that are potential in taking an IF approach, we just do not know. We don't have good evidence as to whether or not that is true for women of reproductive age, basically premenopausal. I think we can all agree women and men are different, right? Biologically, physiologically, very different. Women are designed to make new people. Whether you want to make babies right now or not is irrelevant. Your body is made to do so, should you choose. So our hormones are so different. The hormone cascades and signaling and it's a symphony of signals that have to all cooperate together for everything to operate in homeostasis and alignment and good, strong function. Women are, I don't mean this derogatorily towards women, I mean it scientifically. Women are much more fragile than men. They are much more susceptible to dysfunction in the face of stress because of how complicated the hormone mechanisms are that are required to facilitate a human that can make other humans. We're just more complicated. So females, both rats and humans, are really not ideal candidates for anything that looks or smells like starvation to the brain. Everything goes bonkers if the body thinks that this female who's supposed to be able to make other people or rats is not able to carry out its biological job. Okay? Some of the things I've seen in both myself and my clients and tons of people on the internet, that women that have played around with intermittent fasting, number one, you're gonna hear a ton of people say that they do it and they feel great and they love it. And that's entirely possible. And if that's true for you or your friend, Diane down the street or whomever, good on ya. If it works, do it. Like this is not a blanket statement of me saying that intermittent fasting is wrong for women or bad for women. Nothing is that cut and dry. There is a huge variability in bio-individuality. Say that 3 times fast. But what I am saying is that I have seen time and time and time, over and over and over again, women try something because everyone else is doing it, or because their husband has success with it, or because the studies say it's supposed to be great or do this or whatever, and we don't actually know what it does to women's hormone profiles. Just because it's great for dudes does not mean it's great for women. And intermittent fasting is one of those things, in my very humble opinion. Some of the things that I have seen women say after a long period of playing with fasting are sleeplessness, new or worsening symptoms of anxiety, irregular or disappearing periods altogether, losing their menstrual cycle, increased symptoms of PMS, and even a worsening or new appearance of cystic, which is really hormonal acne. I mean, that's just a handful of things that can pop up after playing around with fasting for too long. I will link a handful of the studies that I'm referring to in the description below if you want to read for yourself. But one study in particular that I will highlight showed that females actually did not experience increased insulin sensitivity, which is a good thing. You want good insulin sensitivity. You want your body to be sensitive to the signals of insulin. So they did not experience increased sensitivity, which would have been good. They didn't get that benefit. But instead, they experienced a decrease in glucose tolerance. They became less tolerant to the glucose that was coming in through their diets. They became less gluten sensitive, which means their metabolisms suffered. There's also a rat study that showed the gender differences between male and female rats that were subjected to a fasting protocol. So this one rat study found that the females, after the fasting protocol, stopped ovulating. Here's the cool part. They did improve cognition and memory. So everybody that says that intermittent fasting is great for improving cognition and mental clarity, yes, they did, but let me tell you why in just a second. Here's the crappy one. They become more energetic and alert during times that they're supposed to be sleeping. For the rats, that's during daytime. So during daytime, which would be our nighttime, they become more energetic and alert. So here's what this says to the researchers. After fasting, the female rat's fertility has gone down. They stopped ovulating. They have improved cognition and memory, and also an increase in alertness and activity during what is supposed to be a sleep time. So their brain thinks that they're starving, and so it's increasing all the mechanisms that would help them go find and acquire food. Like, sleep is not as necessary as food if the brain thinks you're starving. You have to eat, and then we'll sleep. So what would that look like if that was reflected in a female human? You sleep like crap. You either can't fall asleep, you're restless, your brain is spinning, you're having heart palpitations, restless legs, or you do fall asleep and then you wake up every couple of hours and you think it's because you have to pee. Well, your bladder should be able to go 8 hours without having to empty, so something is waking you up, and once you're awake, you realize, oh, I have to pee. But that's probably not what's actually waking you up. At least it shouldn't be. That can be a sign that fasting is not working for us. In this gender study on rats, conversely, the male's fertility went up, and the researchers speculated that that is potentially because in a state of famine or perceived starvation, the biological response is to continue the species, right? Like, that's the most important biological drive of an organism, is to continue the species. So female fertility is going to go down in a starvation state. So the researchers hypothesized that perhaps the male fertility markers went up so that they would be more likely to fertilize a subfertile female that was in dysfunction due to the period of fasting, to the brain's perception of starvation. So the male basically has to compensate. So I'm not saying any of this is 100% correlative to what happens in humans, because these are rats that we're talking about. All I'm saying is that it's an interesting thing to look at, and we don't have good human trials to compare it to. But if we were to take this as a template and go look at it, we should be looking at the differences between males and females when given an intermittent fasting protocol over a long period of time. You can do great on 30 days of anything. You can do great on 6 months of some stuff. Your body might not show dysfunction right away. But what do your hormones look like? What does your sleep look like? What does your skin look like? What does your digestion look like? What are your moods like? What's your personality like? What's your stress tolerance like? What is your belly fat shift looking like? Like, how are you after a year of doing this? The ones that I know are not great. I don't think that it's worth it, in my humble opinion. So if you are considering giving fasting a try, here are the top 3 things why I actually think it could be a good idea for somebody. My 3 pros for fasting. Number 1, it does give digestion a break. So that is one of my beefs, actually, with the bodybuilding, macros kind of side of the world that's mostly about aesthetics and leanness and body composition. They will frequently show and recommend that we eat 5 to 6 small meals a day. And that is really hard on your pancreas. I do not agree with that. I do not think that we should be eating every 2 hours. I don't even think we should be eating every 3 hours. I think 3 basic breakfast, lunch, and dinner meals should suffice for most people most days of the week. Sometimes those will be too spread apart and you'll need to stick a snack in there in between lunch and dinner. Or maybe you didn't get enough calories in throughout your 3 squares and you need to add a little nighttime snack after dinner to make sure that you sleep well well and that you have good recovery and you are pre-fueled for your training the following day or what have you. So I think 3 meals should mostly cut it for most people most of the time, sometimes a 4th. That's my personal opinion. But if we're eating these small meals and snacks every couple of hours all day long, your pancreas is constantly having to pump out insulin to deal with the carbohydrate content of those foods, and your body is always having to break down the proteins and fats, and it's just a lot to ask of your stomach acid, of your enzymes, of all of the organs that are involved in getting the micronutrients out of your food. So that is one pro of having a shorter window, is that it does give your digestion, your whole digestive system, like a long period of time to kind of rest and reset. Another pro is that I talked about how I think that calorie restriction is really shown in the literature to be effective at increasing lifespan and reducing risk of all kinds of diseases, of course, weight loss, all of that stuff. And so fasting 1 meal of the day for some people can be an easy way of calorie restriction without feeling deprived. Like I talked in my first couple of videos. If you didn't see them, please go watch them. I am anti-diet culture. I do not believe that we should be eating less and exercising more. I think that just keeps women very sick and stressed, and it's just a recipe for mental, emotional, and hormonal disaster, in my opinion. So I'm not saying calorie restriction is good, meaning eat as little food as possible. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying that the literature supports people that are eating over and above their metabolic rate, which is a lot of Americans. They will get healthier by reducing some of that caloric load and eating slightly under their metabolic rate. Most women have been eating way under their metabolic rate for so long because we're dieting and trying to lose those last 10 pounds of fat for 30 years. That we end up having a very slow metabolic rate to where you almost can't eat underneath it, and you're eating too few calories for so long that there's nowhere to go and you can't cut. So some of you do not need to be in a calorie deficit. You need to do something more similar to what I'm doing, which is reverse dieting and adding calories slowly back into your life over time. But if we take America as a whole, the standard person that is eating above their metabolic rate, they will live longer, be healthier, and do better to slightly bring down that caloric load. And intermittent fasting, this is my second pro, can be an easy way to do that. It can get you less calories in a shorter window, so you get to eat larger meals when you do eat, and it feels more satisfying. So for that type of personality that does need to cut a few calories, intermittent fasting might be a way to do that without so much pain. And then the third person I already talked about, the third pro, is that it might just work better for your schedule. Some people they definitely can't eat 6 times a day, and they maybe can't even eat 3 times a day, depending on what their schedule is like and what they do for a living. So intermittent fasting might be a really good solution for somebody that just legitimately cannot get in very many meals during their day. I would caution you that if you are in that category and you are a female, you might want to work with somebody to troubleshoot how you could make it possible to eat 3 times a day and not skip breakfast, not do intermittent fasting, because I think the stress that it places on your adrenals and your brain is just not worth the risk. And the cons to fasting, I think I've been pretty clear. I think it can create or exacerbate already existing hormonal issues or imbalances. If you already have any thyroid issues, which you may not be somebody that's been diagnosed with a thyroid disorder or full-blown thyroid disease, but you could be having symptoms of a downregulated thyroid years before it shows up on a functional blood panel. So I actually think there's a lot of people out there that have thyroid issues that are not yet diagnosable. So that's actually a lot of us that are having thyroid issues. And I think intermittent fasting can exacerbate that and maybe put you over the hump of a full-blown condition, perhaps. If you have gallbladder disease or a history of having trouble digesting fats, I do not think that fasting is a great idea for you. If you have a history of disordered eating, golly, fasting is not great. It will mess with your head to tell yourself, oh, I can't eat until 12 p.m. because I'm on this fasting diet. That is a mental trap from hell. And if you have ever struggled with disordered eating or the rules of diet culture, if you think in terms of foods that are good and bad, and am I doing this right or wrong, if that's still the tape that's playing in your head, I do not think that fasting is a good idea for you. I don't think you have a great relationship with food yet, and this could take you down a not great road. I think lack of food is stressful to the body. It increases cortisol, and most people these days are already in a cortisol dominant state. We kind of exist in fight or flight on that sympathetic side of our nervous system. And I am constantly working with people trying to help them get to the parasympathetic side of their nervous system. We are trying to bring cortisol back into a more normal, high in the morning, low at night curve versus just high all the time and then low in the afternoon when you feel like you need a nap or a soda or a candy bar or something, and then back up after you use some sugar or some energy drinks or whatever it is, and then low in the morning when you wake up and you can hardly get out of bed even though you might have slept well. So that like weird backwards cortisol curve that describes a lot of us, we're trying to regulate that to where it's naturally high in the morning when you wake up with the signals of the sun, and then it starts to slowly taper off towards the very end of the day where you're getting sleepy as the sun is going down. We want a cortisol rhythm that mimics the earth. And that's just not how most of us are existing. And that signal that you are not getting enough food, or it's gonna be a long time before you get more food, that spikes cortisol. And I just don't think we need any more of that in our day. Here's the third reason why I really think that intermittent fasting is maybe not a great idea, especially for women, because of that reason I talked about a second ago, where I said most of us have a history of dieting and actually under eating. So just because you think that you are overweight, or you have body weight that you want to lose, or you are trying to lose body fat, that does not mean that you are eating too much. You can be eating too little and have fat to lose. Your body is not oxidizing it because it doesn't feel safe. It's not that the very little amount of food that you are eating is still too much. That's not true. So skipping breakfast for people that have historically under-eaten, which in my experience is most women, especially mothers, because you're just busy and you're taking care of everybody else and you're eating scraps off of your kids' plates and you're grabbing, shakes or protein bars or making a smoothie or whatever on your way out the door, and you have no idea that you think you just ate something, but it was 250 calories. If you did that 3 times a day, that would equal 750 calories for the day. That is, my third grader eats more than that. So I'm just saying, shortening a feeding window for a woman that already struggles to get enough calories in her day is not a great idea. We need all the time available to get our meals in. And then this is the last thing I'll say. Any kind of restriction, and this is a restricted feeding window, can lead to overcompensation later. So what I have seen happen a lot of times is that you may actually not end up in a caloric deficit by doing intermittent fasting, because you are so hungry or angry or irritated or thrown off by having that restricted feeding window that when you do eat, you're either grazing all throughout the day, or you eat a much larger meal than you normally would have, or what have you, and so you end up overeating. And that just causes this binge restrict cycle that I have seen have women in shackles for decades, myself included. I struggled with it for a very long period of time. So that's how I can see it in my clients. So is fasting worth trying if you are overweight or medically obese and trying to improve some metabolic markers? Even if you're a female, perhaps yes. Some of these, like the pros might outweigh the cons. And so it might be a good jumpstart experiment if you are on the pretty overweight side. If you're normal weight, if you're already a light or poor sleeper, if your periods are not super normal right now, should you try it? I personally think not. Thank you for watching today. I would love to hear your thoughts about this whole thing in the comments. Let me know what you think about intermittent fasting. If you want to try it, if you're interested in it, if you have tried it, if you experienced any of the things that I talked about today, let me know what you think. Make sure you're subscribed. I will come out with one of these videos every single Monday, updating you on my journey leading up to my 40th birthday in July of next year. Also, hopefully, sharing a little nugget of wisdom along the way. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next Monday.